This evening you join me by the radiator, in part because the radiator's on, and in part because the lighting is better here and it's at night. And I just wanted to do a little post about something. I've been thinking about it for a bit, and thinking about work and pensions and retirement and things like that has made me think more about this. So some of you may have noticed, most of you probably haven't, that I am I wouldn't say I'm a massive introvert, but I am definitely an introvert. I always have been. As a kid, I was very independent, didn't need a lot of friends, all that sort of thing. Very much, could make my own world. When I first went out to work at 18, I just fell into a job of working as a nursery nurse. And for someone who didn't really want kids, it was very solidifying. When you're looking after 30 under fives, it reminds you of what it can be like. So I did that for about 2 years, and in case you're wondering how long ago that was, my hourly pay was £2.16 an hour. Yeah, I did that for about 2 years, and then I went to work in London for the first time. I joined secretarial temping agencies. In fact, actually, I think before that, I'd gone to college and studied a BTEC in media. Quite possibly one of the most useless things you could do, because I wanted to be a writer, I wanted to be a script writer, I wanted to work in film, and I'd learned how to speed type, how to touch type, so I was pretty fast with a computer, all that sort of thing. And then after I finished there, that was I think 2 years, I went out to work in London for the first time. My first job was in a TV company. I worked as a runner, very badly paid, naff job, lots of office backbiting, all the usual thing you would expect from a TV company. And I think I was there about 8 months and just couldn't afford to stay there anymore because the pay was so bad. And I can't even remember what my living situation was then. I wasn't living at home then. And then I joined secretarial agencies and started temping. And it was the easiest way to get into office work when you had no experience of office work. So they'd give you typing tests and things, speed typing tests, and then they'd put you in a job, and the more jobs you did, the better your experience got, the more you became known, the more you became recommended. And what tended to happen for me was, although I jobbed around a reasonable amount for different companies, which was great, because if you got stuck into a company that you didn't like, you knew you only had to put up with it for a week or 2 weeks, or maybe a few weeks depending on what was going on, and then you were gone, and then you didn't have to go back there again if you didn't want to. But what ended up happening is I would end up in big companies, so I ended up falling into investment banking, and temping in big firms in London, and once they got you in the door and they knew you were a good temp, they'd hang on to you. So if you were there for, say, a week because someone was off sick or on holiday and they knew it was coming to an end, they'd find you another position. And I ended up doing some quite long-term positions where they hadn't decided if they were going to recruit a new secretary, and it was better to have a temp in because they can get rid of you at a moment's notice. They weren't paying any sick pay, there was no holiday pay, there were no pensions, there was no nothing. I got paid through the agency, but it was just your basic pay. When I first started temping, statutory holiday pay and sick pay weren't on the cards. If you were off sick, you lost money. If you wanted a holiday, you had to save up in advance because you weren't going to get any statutory pay. And that's how it was for most of my temping life. But I did end up staying in the same companies for a long time, including like doing maternity cover where I'd be somewhere for 6 months, and it was all right. It was an income. I just got used to it. And I left London eventually in 2003, ended up in Buckinghamshire, went through a few jobs there, and eventually found a company that I stayed at until 2008, which was they refurbished car showrooms and things, and that was a small family firm, and I much preferred that. What I hadn't realised until later on is that for most of the 17 years that I worked in offices, I was living in some kind of weird, altered state. I don't do well with people. I don't do well with noisy, bright, stressful environments. I don't do well with confrontation with people. I don't like environments where people are picking on each other and backbiting each other. I just want an easy life. I've always been like that. And the culmination of that was when moved I moved from Buckinghamshire and I moved to another county, to another city, and I had a plan in my head. I knew what I wanted to do. I'd come into a little bit of money and I wanted to go to university and retrain to do the thing that I'd always wanted to do, which was fashion design. Well, originally I wanted to do costume design. I freelanced that on the side while I was working in offices, and then I decided that's not a career job, there's no money in this, like there is in anything that I've done. And I decided I wanted to retrain for design. So I found the right course that was going to give me the kind of training I wanted, and I moved to the city. I got myself a job, which was the last office job full-time that I've had, and the worst job I've ever had, which was working for a county council. I think it was the city council actually, but it was the same sort of thing. And I've mentioned it briefly on here before and had some conversation with other people about toxic work environments. And it was the final moment when I realised I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't work in these office environments. It was the most awful job I've ever had. The bullying, the bitching, the backstabbing, the nastiness. My stress levels were through the roof. But I only had to get through a year because I got accepted at the university I wanted to be at, so I was only killing time. And when I left that job, I think in the August, and then towards the end of the September I started at university, and I spent 3 years at uni, self-funded, doing the thing that I had always wanted to do with my life. And it was great. It didn't come without its own set of problems. University culture is pretty terrible. I was one of the much older students. I was 35 at the time I went to uni. Most of them were school leavers. Most of them had no idea what they'd applied for. I found the lecturers, there was still that toxic office environment, but I wasn't on that side of it. So 3 years, and then I came out and I started my business. And I did I did join one or two temping agencies just to, get some extra work in as I was getting myself set up. I joined an enterprise startup that was attached to the university, so I had a year of funding and being workshops on how to manage finances, doing marketing, social media, all that sort of thing for small business, and that was brilliant. That was a great year in. But I also did a few temp jobs. I worked in reception at car showrooms. I did a little bit of, I can't remember what else I was working at then. And it reminded me how awful it was, how bitchy it was, how backstabby and toxic. And maybe I was unlucky. Maybe just all the jobs I went into were just horrible. Maybe that's just the way it was. I don't know. But then I left that city. That was in beginning of 2015, and I came up to the northwest, And when I came up here, I managed to get myself a studio, like a workshop, to run my business from. And again, I joined a couple of temping agencies, did a bit of work. I did some work at, I think I did a couple of offices, and I did a short spell at the local university, which is a big recognised university in England. And again, it was the same sort of problem. It wasn't as bad, but whenever those jobs finished, I was so glad when they were over. So, like I said, I spent years doing office jobs, not realising how affected I was by them, not just because of the office environment, but because I am not suited to those kinds of environments. I don't do peopling. And after I moved and I got my workshop and I did a few of those jobs, I was then offered a part-time job helping to manage the building that I was working in, that I had my studio in. And it was an ideal job. It was part-time because somebody else already had the other half of the job. And I would just manage from the office downstairs, open the building in the morning, check that there weren't random people coming and going, accepted a few parcels, chatted to the people who worked in the building, and it was fantastic. I knew everybody who worked there. The contact time was limited. I could sit downstairs in the office with my laptop and get on with work. It was absolutely ideal. The pay was nice. I was doing other things, so the pay was great. I had money over every week. It was wonderful. And then that all fell apart when the owners of the building retired and the building was sold to a property developer, and it all went horribly wrong. And that was like 6 months after I got where I'm living now. Thankfully, I had spare room, so I had to pick up my business, reduce it down, moved it into the spare room, and I literally had about 3 weeks' notice. There was no time to make any decisions. And the building that I was in, the rent was ridiculously cheap, insanely cheap. And I was not going to find anything comparable. So I thought, cut my losses, I'll start working from home. I've done it before. That's something I really always wanted to do, was work from home, be on my own, run a little online business and not have to deal with human beings. So, and that's really where I am stuck in the situation I am in now, because I've done that for 6 years now. And I love working from home. I love that I don't have to deal with people, except on a very small basis. This is my ideal way of working. It just doesn't bring in enough money. So when when I knew working tax credits was coming to the end earlier this year, and that was a small amount of money, but it was to me it was the sign of something that I had been putting off for a long time, and I needed to address, and I should have addressed a long time ago. I'd only just been running my business for a year from home when COVID came along. COVID was a good year for me business-wise because I was online and I was selling a lot of the things that people wanted at that time. So 2020 was a great year for me, and then it slid since then. And I think a lot of small online businesses noticed that downward trend after, everyone came back out into the real world. And of course, since then, we have the cost of living crisis. There's all sorts of other things going on, and it is a challenge. My business income has dropped by 2/3 in a very short space of time. And then working tax credits is coming to an end, and it's kind of like the icing on the cake. And I'm thinking, I should have dealt with this last year. I knew I should have dealt with it. One of the reasons I did the YouTube channels was to make me more accountable, have somewhere to document what's going on. And it has helped. Things have changed. So working tax credits ended. I applied for universal credit, which surprisingly I got, which also makes me more accountable. I've got to prove what I'm doing for work. And it was funny actually, because just before I'd applied for universal credit, I hadn't got it yet, but I was about to have my my meetings. There was the short one about the savings, and then the one about, right, so what are you doing for work and that sort of thing, before I got accepted onto universal credit. And around that time I had seen the advertisement for the cleaning company that I'm now with, and I thought, it's part-time, it's paying above the minimum wage, it looks quite flexible, I'll give it a go. It was the easiest thing to apply for. There's no formal system. They have regulations, obviously. They check your ID, they interview you, but it's very simple. You don't have to go through 6 rounds of interviews to find out you haven't got the job. You don't have to do any stupid personality tests like you do for the supermarket. Ridiculous. I tried that so many times. And I got it. And the best thing about it is it's going to take time to build up the number of hours that, if I could get up to the full number of hours that you're allowed to work through the agency, that would be good money for me. I wouldn't have to worry about doing anything else. That would only be 26 hours a week, but with everything else that I'm doing, that would give me an income that would allow me to keep putting into savings. If I sort out the pension, it would allow me to contribute to that, and it would still give me the freedom that I need to do all the other things that I do. Plus, there are family issues. The problem there is that, and one of the great things about being self-employed is that I live over 250 miles away from family. So I see them 4 times a year, and I will go down, take my work with me, do a week or 2 weeks down there, catch up with family, my brother's family, the kids, my nieces and nephew are growing up fast, and I'm missing all of that. My parents are almost 80. There's all sorts of emotions that I go through when I think about not wasting my time working when family just slips by. And I'm acutely aware of that because I am also a massive genealogy geek, and I can see how the time that you have with your family can just slip through your fingers. If I take a full-time job, I won't see them. It's as simple as that. I'll get 28 days a year if it's statutory. That means Christmas and maybe some other time during the year, because I can't be doing 500-mile round trips just for weekends. I have to take a chunk of time. So that's one of the other conflicting problems I have. If I want to move closer, so if I got a full-time job, I would have to move closer so that it would be easier for me to do shorter visits. But I think that increase of income would have to be so enormous to be able to move further south that I couldn't do it. Not based on my current work history, what I can do, what I'm likely to get in employment. So for the moment, when I applied to UC, when I had those meetings, I think I'd just been accepted by the cleaning agency. So I had no kind of, this is what I'm going to earn from it. Since I applied and got in, which was in August, I've acquired 3 clients, 2 through the agency, 1 privately. But of course, getting the clients depends entirely on people needing cleaners. So when the jobs come up, either regular or one-offs, I grab them. And you can search by area, and there's no point in going right the way across Manchester for 2 hours of cleaning. It's not worth the effort. So I cover a large area around my bit of the county, and that means that when jobs come up in those areas, I can nab them. And the cleaning actually is an ideal job for me. It has the flexibility, it pays above the minimum wage, and I don't have to deal with people. I've got one job, the one job with the elderly couple, who I have to deal with. But it's 3 hours a week, and one of the reasons that I loved taking this role on, well, there were several reasons. 1, it gets me out of the house. 2, it makes me take responsibility for something else rather than just me, and of course it's income. And thirdly, it means that even if I don't talk to anyone else that week, there are 3 hours there when I am face to face with other people. I don't want to completely stop talking to people. I don't have a problem with that, and I can fake people skills easily. I can pretend all the way. People would never know that I was an introvert. But I don't want to be doing it on a 9 to 5 basis in a noisy, busy, badly lit office, constantly being battered by people. So I think this is going to be another deep dive on YouTube, is what are introverts doing for work? How are they finding work? Of course, now we live in the remote working age, it's great for lots of introverts. There are a lot of people who just took their jobs home. There are a lot of people who's like doing things remotely anyway. There was a really interesting conversation stream on Reddit about this. So this person asked, as an introvert, have you found a job in the UK you're happy with? And there were some really interesting answers. The first one that came up was, I manage a block of 200 flats part-time. Now that reminds me of the job I had managing the building where I had my studio. That was a great little setup. I'd have been happy with that one for years. Someone else says tram driver. I mean, I thought about being a bus driver. You don't really have to talk to people on a bus, do you? One person said, I run a machine in a factory, headphones in, and no one really bothers me. Graphic designer working from home. Lots of people in kind of computer-based jobs now working from home. IT support. Don't like using phones. I've got a real thing about talking to people on the phone. Some people said they were support workers, which I thought was an odd one. Delivery driver. I could deliver parcels all day, I guess, but that's a really badly paid bit of work. What else have we got? Somebody posted an interesting comment on this actually and said, you need to read Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. It's not about what you do. We are all in all facets of work. I run the commercial function for a massive business. People adjust to me and I need to flex to what the business needs. So yeah, it's not always about the job you're doing, but how you set it up. Somebody works in doggy daycare and training, just talk to dogs all day, sounds great. Researcher, data analyst, researcher, data analyst, which I could sit and do research all day. Depends what you're researching, I guess. Someone was really happy in optical glazing. So the labs are usually in the basement and there are no people coming in. Scientist, headphones on in the lab and in the office. Most social interaction I have is saying morning and see you tomorrow to my colleagues. Train driver. There's some really good ones there actually. I could be a bus driver or a train driver, I guess. Someone here, a fraud investigator for a bank. That sounds pretty cool. A university library assistant. A crane operator. Somebody here says they're a butler. I didn't know people still had butlers. I can't imagine that being good. Excellent job if you're introverted. Yeah, but you're having to deal with other people's expectations all the time. Photographer. Yeah, no money in that though. Gosh, a modern slavery caseworker. Lorry driver. I'd love to be a long distance lorry driver. I could so do that. Somebody here said that they've struggled and have had to pretend to be extrovert and then they spend the evening recovering. This is what used to happen to me in offices I'd spend really long days. I'd be getting to work at 9, bearing in mind that, particularly when I was commuting into London, I might spend 2 hours just getting there. And sometimes I wasn't leaving the office until so late they had to send a cab to get me because it was too late to send me home on my own, as a woman on my own. So sometimes I wasn't getting home till 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. I hated it. Someone says toilet cleaner. I mean, a cleaner of any kind. I suppose if you really want to avoid people, cleaning offices is probably the best way to do it. Those are the two jobs where I don't have to deal with. Occasionally I'll go in on the Tuesday evening and somebody will still be in one of the offices, but they're usually working. They don't want to really have a conversation with you. Somebody says call centre work. I cannot imagine anything worse than being on the phone to human beings. Somebody here said they accidentally ended up in a job in sales. Sounds dreadful. That sounds like my worst nightmare. Working in finance. I don't know I'd be any good at that. I mean, I can manage mine, but somebody here works on tugboats. Truck driver, computer analyst, night shift security. I thought about night shift work, but that really messes up everything else. I knew somebody, or I had an ex-partner who worked night shift on a job, and he completely changed as a human being. He became an absolute monster because of the sleep deprivation, because you can't just sleep during the day. It was really quite worrying. So there's a whole bunch of things there, but I'm not sure when I go into my universal credit meetings and say, yeah, I just hate people, can you give me a job where I don't have to speak to any human beings? I'm not sure they're going to see my point of view. So there was something else that I was going to ask as a question on YouTube, and I might as well throw it in here. If you had a chance to have another career, what would you do? And I say another career, maybe you still haven't had your first career. I mean, people find their dream jobs 40s, 50s, even later. I'm not bothered about that. It's not about your age, it's about whether or not you find your happy place in work. So if I completely ditched the creative stuff I do now, what would I want to do? I would love to be a fine art conservationist. There's a channel that I follow on YouTube. I forget the name of it. It begins with B. And this chap restores fine art, and it's just the most beautiful thing I think I've ever seen. I could really do that job. The other thing that I would love to do is to be a forensic genealogist. I'd love to have gone into forensics, but don't you hate it when you can hear your neighbours having sex? It drives me nuts. It happens to me all the time. Every neighbour I've had underneath has been a nightmare for it. Anyway, it's distracted me completely. Yeah, so forensic genealogy. Forensics, like police forensics, I would love to have gone into, but I'm really bad with medical stuff. So things like seeing murders and blood and stuff like that, I don't know. But forensic genealogy would be great. The progress in DNA and using that to solve crimes and things like that is just absolutely amazing. So if I was going to retrain, and I could retrain, and I knew I was going to get a job at it, those are the two things that I would really like to do with the rest of my working life. So fine art restoration or forensic genealogy. But I don't think either of those are going to happen somehow. But that's why you put these things out on YouTube, because you never know who's watching, do you? Anyway, it's really late. It's 10:30. I've had one of those evenings where I just haven't stopped working and my brain is still so active. When I go to bed in half an hour, I will just lay there for ages. So I really need to stop now. And I've been rabbiting for 32 minutes, so it's time to wind down for the evening. So thank you for listening. I'm sure plenty of you will have comments on all these things. Particularly interested in your introvert job experiences, because I bet there's loads of you out there watching, and what you would do if you started a new career, or if you did the thing that you really wanted to do rather than the crappy job you do now that you really hate. Really interested to know about this, because I'm nosy, and because why not? Good night.